He was just a security guard, until the CEO's desperate call at 3 a.m. revealed the true value of his quiet observations. Most people saw Marcus Thorne as part of the furniture at Innovate Global, another fixture in the gleaming glass and steel lobby, blending seamlessly with the polished floors and the quiet hum of the servers upstairs. For 8 years, Marcus had held the night shift, watching the building breathe in the absence of its daytime inhabitants. He knew the rhythm of the place, the faint tremor when the freight elevator moved, the specific squeak of the CEO's private lift on the 20th floor, the almost imperceptible flicker in the East Wing's emergency lights just before they needed a bulb change. He knew the ghost in the server room that sometimes tripped the motion sensor at 2:17 a.m., usually just a cold draft from the vents. Tonight it was the kind of silence that felt too heavy, even for a Tuesday. Marcus sat in his small, brightly lit control room, the glow of a dozen monitors reflecting in his glasses. Each screen displayed a different angle of the sprawling complex: the main entrance, the empty cafeterias, the rows of deserted cubicles, the high-security server farms. He sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, the only personal item allowed in his sterile workspace. The clock on his desk ticked towards 3 a.m. Another hour and a half until his shift ended, another hour and a half of silent vigilance. Sound of a phone vibrating on a desk, a harsh, insistent buzz. His work phone, the secure line, rarely rang unless it was an alarm or a direct directive from head of security. He glanced at the caller ID. Ununicono. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered. Thorne, Innovate Global Security, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. Marcus, thank God you answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, sharp with panic, yet recognizable. It's Eleanor Vance. Are you in the building? Eleanor Vance. The CEO, a force of nature, who usually communicated through a phalanx of assistants and emails signed with a single crisp EV. Her voice, usually composed and authoritative, was now frayed at the edges. Marcus had only ever seen her in person during her brief, decisive entries and exits from the building, always surrounded by an entourage. He had never once heard her use his first name. Yes, Miss Vance, I'm here. Is everything all right? Marcus's voice remained calm, a deliberate anchor against her rising tide of distress. No, Marcus, nothing is all right. The entire network is down. I mean down. Black screen, no access to anything. It's not just our main server, it's our backups, our cloud, everything connected to the primary data core. It's gone. Her voice cracked. My head of IT, David Chen, he just called me from home. He can't even remotely access a diagnostic. He said it's like the whole system vanished into thin air. Marcus's gaze swept over his monitors. All the security feeds were still active, a separate analog system. The lights in the server rooms were still on. The temperature readings were stable. From his end, the physical building was fine, but a network collapse of this magnitude was catastrophic. Innovate Global handled sensitive client data, next-gen prototypes, and multi-million-dollar transactions. This wasn't just a glitch. It was a crisis that could sink the company. Have you checked the physical servers, Miss Vance? Any signs of tampering at the racks? Marcus asked, his mind already running through the checklists. We can't. No one can get in remotely. David says it's like a complete system lockout. He's rushing in now, but he's an hour away. And the police won't even send anyone unless we can confirm a physical break-in. They think it's just a massive power outage. But it's not a power porch, Marcus. The lights are on, the alarms are active. Something else is happening. Her breathing was shallow, hurried. I need you to go to the main server farm. Level B3. See if there's anything at all. Marcus stood up, his movements fluid and economical. Years of patrols making him efficient. Understood, Ms. Vance. I'm on my way. Be careful, Marcus, David said. He said this kind of shutdown, it suggests someone might have been inside. I will, Marcus confirmed, his hand already reaching for his heavy-duty flashlight and the master keycard. He didn't express the thought that was already forming in his mind, the small, seemingly insignificant detail he'd noticed just yesterday, a detail that no one else would have registered. Certainly not someone in Miss Vance's position, too far removed from the daily grind of the building's hidden corners. He stepped out of the control room, the sudden silence of the empty office complex swallowing him whole. The only sound was the distant hum of the building's infrastructure and the soft, almost imperceptible thump-thump of his own footsteps on the plush carpet. The air conditioning hummed, cool and sterile. Everything seemed normal, yet everything was profoundly wrong. Marcus headed towards the restricted elevator that descended directly to the basement levels, his mind racing through the potential scenarios, each one worse than the last. But one detail kept nagging him, a loose thread he'd almost dismissed, a detail about a newly hired maintenance technician and a very specific, unusual delivery package he'd seen them receive just 2 days ago. A package that shouldn't have been routed through the loading dock, and certainly shouldn't have been handled with such secretive urgency. Marcus navigated the silent corridors of Innovate Global, the only sound now the soft clink of his keys against the metal of his belt. The air, usually circulating with the faint scent of fresh coffee and office paper, now carried a subtle, metallic tang, a smell he associated with overworked machinery, or perhaps something more sinister. The security elevator was slow, a deliberate descent into the belly of the building. Each floor sign that flickered past felt like a deeper plunge into the unknown. When the doors finally hissed open on B3, the change was immediate. The hum of the server farm, usually a high-pitched, almost musical whine, was gone, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. The emergency lights cast long, stark shadows, painting the rows of server racks in shades of stark white and impenetrable black. It was like walking into the skeletal remains of a technological giant. Marcus moved with practiced ease, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He checked the main power conduits, the network hubs, the intricate wiring. Everything looked physically undisturbed. No forced entry, no smashed panels, no signs of a struggle. This wasn't a brute force attack. This was surgical. He pulled out his company-issued tablet, a clunky device usually used for logging patrols. He tried to ping the local network, to access any diagnostic logs. Nothing. The screen remained stubbornly blank, refusing to connect. It was as Eleanor Vance had described, a total lockout. Approaching from the corridor, Marcus turned, his hand instinctively going to the small non-lethal deterrent on his belt. It wasn't a weapon, but a familiar weight that reassured him. The footsteps grew louder, and then Eleanor Vance herself appeared in the doorway, her usually immaculate hair slightly disheveled, her expensive suit jacket clutched in one hand. She was breathing heavily, having clearly run down the stairs from the executive parking level. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide with a raw, unconcealed panic. "Marcus, anything?" she gasped, her voice echoing in the vast, silent room. "Physically, Miss Vance, it looks undisturbed," Marcus replied, his beam sweeping across a bank of inactive servers. No signs of a forced entry, no broken locks. Eleanor rushed past him, her heels clicking nervously on the concrete floor. She stared at the rows of dark machines, her reflection visible in their unlit surfaces. "But it's dead, Marcus. Completely dead." "How can that be?" David said it's an impossible scenario without physical sabotage. Marcus watched her, observing the frantic energy that radiated from her. He knew the type. Brilliant, driven, but utterly out of her element when the carefully constructed order of her world shattered. This wasn't a quarterly report she could pivot on. This was a fundamental breach. "Impossible isn't always physical, Miss Vance," Marcus stated calmly, his voice cutting through her mounting despair. "Sometimes it's about what you allow to happen." Eleanor spun around, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about? What could I have allowed?" "The new maintenance technician," Marcus said, his voice flat, devoid of accusation, simply stating a fact. "The one who started 2 days ago. Young man, tall, thin build, always wears that bright red baseball cap." Eleanor frowned, clearly trying to place the person. "We hired a few new people in facilities last week. Turnover is high in that department." "What about him?" "He signed for a package yesterday," Marcus continued, his flashlight beam now resting on a specific, unmarked server rack near the back wall. "A custom delivery. After hours, it was routed to the loading dock, but he insisted on taking it himself right from the truck, said it was sensitive equipment for server diagnostics, couldn't wait." Eleanor looked from Marcus to the server rack, a dawning horror creeping onto her face. "A diagnostics package? Why wasn't I informed? David Chen would have handled any critical IT deliveries." "My thoughts exactly, Miss Vance," Marcus said, stepping closer to the rack. "And it wasn't logged in the standard security manifest. I only caught it because I was doing my perimeter check, and happened to be by the loading dock when the truck pulled up. He seemed unusually keen to avoid me seeing the contents, held the box close, shielded it from my view." Marcus knelt beside the rack, his flashlight now illuminating a small, almost invisible panel on the side, typically only accessible with specialized tools. It was slightly ajar, a hair's breadth opening, barely perceptible in the dim light. A small, almost imperceptible scratch marked the smooth metal beside it. "And," Marcus added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "he didn't use his keycard to access this section of B3. He just walked through, which means someone inside already gave him the access, or deactivated the internal lockdown for him." Eleanor's face went white. She finally looked at Marcus, truly looked at him, not as a uniform but as a person with critical information. "Marcus, are you saying this new technician, he did this?"
"I'm saying the timing is suspicious, Ms. Vance.
A network collapse of this magnitude, immediately after an unauthorized, unlogged delivery of sensitive equipment by someone with suspiciously easy access. It suggests a very specific, targeted insertion. A Trojan horse, if you will. Marcus pointed to the tiny gap in the panel. Whatever he installed, it wasn't for diagnostics. It was to take us offline. The silence in the server farm grew heavier, filled only with the frantic beats of Eleanor Vance's heart. The true nature of the crisis, far more insidious than a simple power outage, began to sink in. She had hired him, or rather, her HR department had. And Marcus, the quiet observer, had seen the single, crucial detail that everyone else, blinded by assumptions and procedure, had completely missed. Eleanor Vance, the high-powered CEO, usually thrived in environments where she was in control. Boardrooms, investor calls, strategic summits. But here, in the cold, silent heart of her company's digital brain, stripped of her usual entourage and the comforting hum of her tech, she was exposed. The meticulous order she'd built her empire on had vanished, replaced by an unsettling void that Marcus Thorne, the unassuming security guard, seemed to navigate with an unnerving calm. A Trojan horse, she repeated, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. So you're saying he wasn't just a new hire? He was planted. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze still on a slightly ajar panel. That would explain the perfect execution, Miss Vance. No alarms, no physical damage, just a clean cut. Someone wanted to sever Innovate Global from its own data, quickly and quietly. Eleanor pressed a hand to her temple, trying to force her racing thoughts into some semblance of order. But why? Who would do this? And how could he get through HR? Through background checks? Sometimes, Ms. Vance, Marcus interrupted softly, his voice firm but empathetic. The best way to get through security isn't to blast through it. It's to be overlooked. To be exactly what people expect to see, so they don't look closer. He straightened up, turning to face her fully. A new, low-level technician. Someone busy enough to be noticed, but not important enough to be questioned. And a very specific package delivered with urgency. It creates a narrative that distracts from the truth. Eleanor stared at the tiny scratch Marcus had pointed out. It was a hairline mark, almost invisible to the untrained eye. But now, knowing what it signified, it felt like a gaping wound. Her gaze then drifted to Marcus, really seeing him for the first time. The quiet man who always stood in the background, who always gave a polite nod, who had seen more than she ever could have imagined. But the access, Marcus, she pressed, her mind still grappling with the betrayal. You said he didn't use his keycard for this section. Someone must have allowed him. Marcus walked over to a small wall-mounted control box, usually secured behind a locked grate. The grate was slightly ajar, almost imperceptibly, and a single, thin wire dangled from one of the exposed ports. This is the manual override for this zone's internal lockdown, Marcus explained, his voice even. It requires a specific sequence and a physical bypass. Someone with high-level access to the security infrastructure would have to do it from within the building, or provide detailed instructions, and they'd have to know exactly when to do it. Eleanor's eyes scanned the control box, then flickered back to Marcus. So it's an inside job. Someone high up. Her voice was barely a whisper. Someone I trust. Sound of faint, distorted voices and static from Marcus's control room speaker, left open in the main lobby. Suddenly a crackle came from the walkie-talkie clipped to Marcus's belt. It was the general line, the one usually reserved for mundane communications between guards. The voices were urgent, overlapping, tinged with panic. This is Sector 4, seeing motion in the CEO's office. Repeat, CEO's office. No one's supposed to be up there. A voice crackled. Negative, control. All personnel accounted for. Could be a system glitch from the blackout. Another voice interrupted, then static. Marcus and Eleanor exchanged a grim look. The CEO's office, Eleanor whispered, her earlier fear returning, intensified by the realization that the threat might still be active, still in her building. But who? The network may be down, Miss Vance, but the physical cameras are still feeding to my control room, Marcus stated, already moving towards the elevator. And if there's motion up there, it's not a glitch. Someone's still here, and they're going after the source. The source of what? Eleanor asked, her mind struggling to keep up. The source of the problem, and the solution, Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the elevator panel. The records, the paper trails, whatever wasn't digitized, whatever would expose them. Eleanor understood instantly. In the age of digital dominance, the last vestiges of true vulnerability lay in the physical world. The hard copies, the personal files, the human element. If someone had taken down the network to cover their tracks, they'd want to eliminate anything that could lead back to them, anything that Marcus might have seen. And if they knew he was here, they knew he was a threat. We need to call the police again, Marcus, Eleanor said, fumbling for her phone. Tell them it's an active breach, a physical threat. They won't get here in time if someone's already on the 20th floor, Miss Vance, Marcus said, his voice grave. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. He stepped in, his posture alert, not panicked. We have to secure the office first, and we need to get to my control room. That's where all the feeds are. That's where we can see who's really here. Eleanor hesitated for only a moment. Her company, her legacy was crumbling around her, and the only person who seemed to grasp the full scope of the disaster was the quiet, unassuming security guard she barely knew. It was a terrifying realization, and a humbling one. She swallowed hard, then stepped into the elevator beside him. As the doors closed, sealing them in the small ascending box, Eleanor looked at Marcus. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking at a job title or a uniform. She was looking at a man who held the keys, not just to the building, but to understanding the true nature of the threat. And in his steady gaze, she found a strange, unexpected flicker of hope. The quiet observer was about to become the unexpected hero. The ascent in the elevator felt agonizingly slow, each floor number glowing red, then fading, stretching time into an unbearable eternity. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a silent countdown to whatever awaited them on the 20th floor. Eleanor clutched her suit jacket tighter, her knuckles white. She found herself watching Marcus in the dim reflection of the elevator doors. His expression was resolute, his eyes scanning the floor indicators, not with fear but with a quiet, analytical intensity. He was processing, calculating, preparing. When the elevator chimed softly and the doors opened on the 20th floor, the silence was even more profound than in the server farm. This was the executive floor, usually a hive of hushed activity, now completely deserted. The expensive artwork on the walls seemed to absorb all sound. "My office is straight ahead," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "The main security control is in the opposite direction, near the service stairwell. Control room first, Miss Vance," Marcus decided, his voice calm, decisive. "We need eyes, we need confirmation." He led the way, moving with a fluid, confident gait that belied his unassuming appearance. Eleanor followed, her steps tentative, each one echoing loudly in the vast empty space. Her gaze darted from side to side, half expecting to see a shadow detach itself from the corners of the luxurious hall. They reached the discreet, unmarked door of Marcus's main control room for the executive floor. He swiped his card, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, it was a smaller version of his basement hub, a bank of monitors displaying every angle of the executive wing, offices, conference rooms, even the CEO's private lounge. Marcus immediately focused on the monitor displaying Eleanor's large panoramic office. The screen showed the interior, bathed in the soft glow of emergency lighting. And there a figure was visible, not the new technician but someone broader, more imposing. They were at Eleanor's personal desk, meticulously sifting through physical files, opening drawers, and placing documents into a large dark duffel bag. "He's destroying everything," Eleanor breathed, her voice filled with a fresh wave of horror. "My personal files, contract drafts, sensitive client data, all the paper backups." "And that confirms it," Marcus said, his voice grim. This wasn't just about taking down the network, it was about eliminating anything that survived the digital wipe, a complete erasure. He zoomed in on the figure. The face was obscured by shadow and a dark hood, but the movements were precise, efficient. Not the panicked rummaging of a thief, but the methodical work of someone on a mission. "Can you identify him, Marcus?" Eleanor pleaded, leaning closer to the screen. "Not from this angle," Marcus replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard, trying different camera angles. "But the build familiar, and he knows exactly where to look." This isn't his first time in that office. Suddenly, the figure on screen paused. It lifted its head slightly, as if sensing something. Then it turned its head slowly, directly towards the hidden camera. For a split second, a sliver of light caught a distinct, almost imperceptible scar just below the figure's left eye. Eleanor gasped, "No, it can't be." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "You know him, Miss Vance?" Her face was a mask of disbelief, then dawning fury. "It's Kenneth Monroe, my head of security." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Kenneth Monroe, the man she trusted implicitly with the safety of her company, with her very life, the one who had personally vouched for countless hires, oversaw all protocols, and had been with Innovate Global for 15 years. And he had a small, distinctive scar under his left eye from a hunting accident she vaguely recalled hearing about. He was the one who oversaw the new hires, including that technician, Eleanor murmured, her voice barely audible, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying precision. He must have manipulated the background checks, granted the technician access, and now he's here, erasing his own tracks. He knew the system better than anyone. "Miss Vance," Marcus confirmed, his gaze unwavering on the screen. He knew where the digital weaknesses were and where the physical vulnerabilities lay. And he knew where you kept your undigitized files. The figure on screen. Kenneth finished bagging the documents. He then pulled out a small specialized device and attached it to what looked like a hidden hard drive on Eleanor's desk. A red light blinked ominously. "He's wiping the local hard drive too," Marcus stated. "Anything that might have been stored on the desktop." "What do we do, Marcus?" Eleanor asked, her voice cracking. Her most trusted advisor, the man paid to protect her, was dismantling her company from the inside. "We stop him," Marcus said simply, his hand reaching for the general alarm override panel beside his console. "The network may be down, but the building's physical alarms are separate, and Kenneth Monroe, for all his planning, probably isn't expecting a manual lockdown." But as Marcus's fingers hovered over the big red button, Kenneth Monroe on screen suddenly looked up again, directly into the camera. He raised a hand, revealing a small remote control device. He pressed a button. Sound, a sharp, piercing alarm blares throughout the building. Not the subtle, zone-specific alarm Marcus was about to trigger, but the full, ear-splitting, building-wide evacuation alarm. Eleanor jumped, startled by the deafening sound. He knew we were here. He's drawing attention to himself." "He's not drawing attention to himself, Miss Vance," Marcus corrected, his voice cutting through the blaring siren. "He's drawing attention to us. He's making it look like we're the ones responsible. A cover-up." The alarm continued to shriek, echoing through the empty halls. On Marcus's monitors, lights began flashing in the empty offices. Sirens could be heard approaching from the street, faint at first, then growing louder. Kenneth Monroe, on the screen, slipped the duffel bag over his shoulder, gave one last chilling look towards the camera, and then melted back into the shadows of Eleanor's office. "He's gone," Eleanor whispered, watching the empty screen with a mix of fury and despair. "He's going to slip out in the chaos, blend with the first responders. He's going to try," Marcus countered, his eyes fixed on one of the other monitors. But he forgot one thing. The quiet observer never just watches. He pointed to a specific camera feed, showing the main service stairwell, and rarely used exit near the loading dock. A figure, dark and hooded, was just entering the stairwell, heading down. Kenneth Monroe. "He thinks he's invisible in the chaos," Marcus continued, a steely resolve in his voice. "But chaos makes me see things clearer, and I know every shadow, every hidden exit in this building." He was already pulling open a drawer beneath his console, revealing a set of blueprints. "There's another way out, a service tunnel, connected to the old ventilation system. It leads directly to the public metro station, 2 blocks away. It's unmarked on standard maps." Eleanor looked at him, then at the frantic flashing monitors, then back at the calm, determined face of her security guard. He had just revealed a secret passage in her own building, a passage even she, the CEO, knew nothing about. "How do you know about that?" she asked, her voice tinged with incredulity. Marcus simply looked at her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "I observe, Miss Vance. It's my job." He grabbed a heavier flashlight and a set of keys. "We have to cut him off at the tunnel before he makes it out of here." Marcus led the way, his steps quick and deliberate as they navigated the labyrinthine service corridors behind the executive offices. Eleanor, despite her expensive heels in the late hour, kept pace, her earlier panic replaced by a steely resolve. The blare of the building-wide alarm was still deafening, a relentless assault on their ears, but Marcus seemed to tune it out, his focus entirely on their objective. He moved with an intimate knowledge of the building, a silent guide through its hidden arteries. He unlocked maintenance panels, ducked under low pipes, and slid through narrow passages that Eleanor, in her entire tenure as CEO, had never known existed. This wasn't just a building to Marcus, it was a living entity, every creak and hum a part of its complex language. He was fluent in it. The old ventilation system was repurposed into a service tunnel decades ago, Marcus explained over the din of the alarm, his voice carrying surprising clarity. "Runs directly beneath the street. Connects here to the public metro station, out of sight." Kenneth probably thought it was his secret escape route. Eleanor's breath hitched. "He planned this. Every detail he thought he knew," Marcus corrected, pushing open a heavy, unmarked door that led into a dark, dusty tunnel. The air immediately changed, becoming cooler, damper, carrying the faint, earthy scent of concrete and old metal. He forgot that some knowledge isn't found in schematics. They plunged into the darkness of the tunnel, Marcus's powerful flashlight cutting a path through the oppressive gloom. The sounds of the building alarm faded, replaced by the distant, rumbling echo of a subway train beneath the city streets. Ahead, Marcus could see the faint glow of Kenneth Monroe's flashlight beam, a tiny, bobbing pinprick of light far down the tunnel. He was moving fast. "He's making for the metro exit," Marcus said, breaking into a jog. Eleanor, despite her initial apprehension, matched his pace, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her career, her company, her reputation, it all hinged on catching this man. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them into single file. Pipes snaked along the ceiling, and puddles of stagnant water glinted under Marcus's light. Eleanor stumbled once, catching herself on a rusty pipe, but she didn't slow down. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about pride, about justice. As they rounded a bend, Kenneth's silhouette became clearer. He was pushing through a heavy, reinforced door that led to a maintenance access point for the metro system. He was almost out. "Kenneth, stop!" Eleanor's voice, raw and unaccustomed to shouting in such a confined space, echoed down the tunnel. Kenneth froze. His head snapped back, his flashlight beam swinging wildly before settling on them. He saw Eleanor and then Marcus standing behind her, resolute. A flicker of surprise, then cold fury, crossed his face. He quickly pulled out something from his jacket, a small metallic object. "He's destroying it," Eleanor cried, recognizing the motion. "He's going to smash the hard drive from my office." Marcus didn't hesitate. He accelerated, covering the ground between them in powerful strides. Kenneth, realizing he was cornered, raised his hand, aiming the small device at the concrete wall. "You won't get away with this, Kenneth," Eleanor yelled, summoning every ounce of her executive authority, even here in the dark, dirty tunnel. Kenneth snarled. "You're wrong, Eleanor. This company was going down anyway. I was just cutting my losses, and now you and your little security guard will be the fall guys." He brought his arm back, ready to smash the drive. Just as his arm swung forward, Marcus launched himself, not directly at Kenneth, but with a calculated lunge, aiming for a loose floor grate next to Kenneth's feet. With a grunt, Marcus kicked the grate upwards. It clanged against Kenneth's shin, throwing him off balance. The small hard drive flew from his grasp, skittering across the grimy floor and sliding into a shallow pool of water near the tunnel wall. Kenneth roared in frustration, momentarily stunned. Marcus, already back on his feet, moved to secure the entrance to the metro access point, physically bracing the door shut. Eleanor scrambled forward, splashing through the water, her hands reaching for the submerged hard drive. She fished it out, water dripping from her fingers, but the device felt intact. The red light that had been blinking on it earlier was now thankfully dark. It's still good," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with relief. Kenneth, recovering from the surprise attack, lunged at Marcus, a desperate, cornered animal. But Marcus, though appearing unassuming, moved with a surprising economy of motion. He sidestepped Kenneth's clumsy charge, then used his body weight to shove him firmly against the tunnel wall, pinning him there. "It's over, Kenneth," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. "The system is compromised, but the evidence isn't, and the police are already above ground, waiting for someone to try and slip away." Just then, faint voices could be heard from the metro access door. Marcus was holding shut, urgent shouts, the beam of flashlights, and the unmistakable sound of police radios. They had been close behind. Kenneth Monroe, defeated, slumped against the wall, his carefully constructed plan crumbling around him. The quiet observer had seen through his deception, not with high-tech surveillance or advanced algorithms, but with simple, unshakable observation and an unwavering moral compass. The story is nearing its conclusion. I anticipate one more segment to cover the immediate